Imagine that you are being led deep into a cave by the light of a flickering torch. You have already traveled over land, through stunning rock gorges, past white limestone cliffs, to this remarkable place where a river flows swiftly through a fantastic natural stone arch. This arch takes your breath away, and you stop to marvel in awe. The arch with its river is a rare and spectacular sight. The water roars beneath you as you approach the cave. You enter the cave and step into a fabulously large gallery, over 100 feet high and 130 feet wide. It is full of stone columns and strewn with stalagmites and stalactites, broken and whole. Beyond this one lie many more galleries in the depths, with 1,000 more feet of the cave. Remarkably, you see some animals by the flickering light. They appear to move. What are they? Huge cave bear, rhinoceroses, lions, panthers, and mammoths appear on the walls and the ceiling. A whole herd of horses seems to gallop by. You see a bear skull placed on an altar in one of the last, deepest chambers. Bear claw scratches appear on the walls, some on the animal images. Handprints and cross hatchings in red appear in odd places. You see other people dancing around the altar. They appear to be deep in a trance. The sounds of drums and muffled chanting accompany the dance. The flames flicker, and the animals on the walls seem to come alive. Where are we? We are in what today is France, in the picturesque Ardèche Valley. But the cave paintings were made 30 to 35,000 or so years ago, in the Paleolithic age, during the Aurignacian period. This cave, Chauvet, is one of the largest and contains the earliest known art made by humans. It's spectacular. If you look at the art here closely, you begin to understand a great deal about the humans who created it. You learn what their lives might have been like, their beliefs, and especially what their environment must have been like. Clearly, it was full of dangerous, large, and now extinct animals that we can only hazily imagine roaming the land. And because this shows some of the earliest human artistic efforts that we know of, we learn something about art itself. How do we do this? By looking at the location, the materials used, the subject matter, the style, the groupings, and the skill involved. Then we can begin to speculate about the purpose of the art, although that is something we can never know for sure. We will also see that some subjects and themes are clearly important in the art. Dangerous animals, herd animals, geometric signs, and hand images. Much more rarely, we see a depiction of humans, including female genitalia, which crops up again frequently in our later ancient artworks. Chauvet Cave is an extraordinarily large cave with a very complex arrangement of chambers. Cave bears lived there and left their traces, their bones, claw scratchings, and even impressions of their bodies. The deepest, most remote recesses of the cave are where the most interesting figural art actually appears. The animals found there are sketched mostly in charcoal black pigments, with fewer painted in red. Animals are either painted on the walls or deeply engraved on previously scraped and prepared surfaces. Some of the animals here at Chauvet appear in magnificent, coherent groups, like the so-called panel of the horses, which has horses, rhinos, and bison. In other places, animal representations are less organized. They appear willy-nilly, sometimes with one painted or scratched over the other. Handprints, in red, appear closest to the entrance, while a skull of a bear sits upon an altar-like projection at the very back. These deep cave chambers were clearly not good for people to live in because they were so far from the light and the entrance. So the use of these cave recesses, which were not practical for living, clearly had meaning beyond the mundane. What exactly do Aurignacian artists from 30,000 years ago choose to represent in their art? Well, it seems that about 13 species of animals appear here. They consist of the large and mostly the dangerous, fierce ones. Those dangerous ones are lion, cave bear, mammoths, and rhinos. And they have been counted at 63% of all the animal images. This is a bit different from later caves, in which we see more herd animals, things that were less dangerous and were hunted. Here, for instance, are some fantastic representations of rhinoceroses. Rhinos were unusual in cave art found before Chauvet was actually discovered. Rhinos were probably feared and admired, perhaps because of their unusual skin and horns and their menacing appearance and behavior. My personal observations or experiences with rhinos in Kenya was this: they had bad eyesight and would charge you if they were spooked, but otherwise they just didn't want to be bothered. Notice how deftly and masterfully the artist sketches the simple but expressive outline of the rhinos with charcoal. There is a whole herd of rhinos here in the end chamber, about 17 animals, which is a uniquely large grouping in cave art. If you look closely, the rhino towards the top has an exceptionally large swooping horn, which is repeated by many more horns. The repetition of this horn could be interpreted like this. The artist has tried to indicate more rhinos with overlapping and even uses perspective, since the horns get smaller as they recede. Overlapping is a technique that we see much later in ancient art, used amongst the Egyptians and Mesopotamians to show multiples of people or animals. Or perhaps the artist has meant to represent motion of the rhino. Whichever was the intent of the artist, it shows that conceptually he had put great forethought into this representation and wanted it to convey specific information about the rhinos. Either way you look at it, overlapping or moving, this is a remarkably skilled and sophisticated rhino sketch. Why? Because of the sureness of the sinuous charcoal outline, the beauty of the shading, and its very realistic feel that you get for the animals. This has to make you pause and wonder what the Paleolithic artists were thinking. In another scene in the cave, which is called the panel of the horses, we find 20 animals. Most dramatic is the scene of rhinos who appear to be crashing into one another. They confront each other and fight. The battle is communicated to us in very quick brush strokes of charcoal, even showing the splaying out of the front legs. This fight scene is unusual. We're seeing that the artists were very aware of the behavior of the animals, the way they look, and even the relationships of one kind of animal to another. You might also notice that rhinos have a sort of dark band around their middles. This might be an interpretation of the rhino's thickened hide, which looked like plates to the artist Albrecht Dürer thousands of years later. Now, let's look at the horses in this panel. These are truly extraordinary. This set of horses is undoubtedly one of the masterpieces of human art. We can also learn a great deal about the artist's world from the scene. You can see that these horses belong to an entirely different species from our modern domestic horses. Why? Because they have short heads, highly arched necks, small eyes, and stiff brush-like manes. They're closest to the modern Przewalski horse, which is a descendant of these wild early horses. These Paleolithic horses seen here are thought to have been hunted for meat, according to excavations which revealed their bones. Horses probably made up a considerable portion of the meat in the Paleolithic diet. Horses hadn't yet come under the control of man. They weren't tamed or domesticated. But it seems reasonable to assume that the beauty and the agility of the horse was in fact appreciated by the Paleolithic artist. In some depictions, the artist has even shown the dark face and the markings of an individual horse, which make it distinct from other members of the same herd with lighter faces. So we know that the artist was attempting to depict differences in the coats of the horses. The panel of the horses tells us that the Paleolithic artists were perceptive observers of the animals around them. They were even more precise and meticulous recorders of the animals' appearances than we usually give them credit for. Human lives depended upon these animals and this sort of close observation, so perhaps it makes a lot of sense. And the naturalism and skill of the representations is really astonishing. It does feel as if the animals come alive before you. You can only imagine what it must have been like to make your way deep into the cave by torchlight, only to see these flickering images bounding forth from the recesses of mysterious hidden niches. As you can see, with all these accurate details and this incredibly skillful rendering of the animals, there's nothing crude or primitive about the art at all. In fact, we would be very pleased if anyone in our family painted like that. This is art of high sophistication, and clearly it has importance to the artist's whole group. In other scenes, we see woolly mammoths. Some are engraved into the background, so their outline appears white, and others are painted in charcoal. The quick outlines give us a clear sense of their lumbering hugeness. They even show a young mammoth, which is clearly different from his elders. In this cave, mammoths are not as numerous as in other caves. The rhinos and lions predominate here. These mammoths, though, were pretty impressive beasts. Unlike our popular impression of Paleolithic man as a mammoth hunter, it seems quite likely that the mammoth was a little too large and maybe too dangerous for human hunters to track and bring down often. The horse and reindeer would have been preferable in terms of ease of hunting. Yet, as we've seen, it's the dangerous animals that predominate in the cave, like the lions. One of the most famous and spectacular scenes from Chauvet is this panel of the lions found in the last chamber. Astonishingly, it shows a whole pride of lions, 16, appearing to close in for the kill on bison. The maneless lions are stretched out as if they are stalking, and their feline muzzles are stippled with whiskers in some cases. There's charcoal shading of the heads as if to indicate volume, and the artist employs what seems to be overlapping. The whole area for the panel appears to have been scraped in preparation for painting this scene. The scene also shows remarkable organization and a sense for the dramatic moment. This sophistication of both thought and realization is really remarkable. The artists, after all, were able to express cogent characteristics of the appearance of an animal, like, for instance, eye pupils, which show a clear direction of gaze, or panting mouths, and erect ears, vagaries of the coat markings. At the same time, the lions here coalesced in a scene which recreates one of the most exciting and important moments of the lion hunt. So there is a regard on the part of the artist for both the appearance and action and organization. I believe that the representation of a pride of lions here, or herds of bison and horses elsewhere, is very intentional. It would imply that the artists and the group were seeing the animals as cooperative creatures, which they themselves had to be. Clearly, the analogies between lions cooperating in order to achieve success in a hunt and humans doing the same thing. This could be a lesson or an observation or a wish. Other animals that appear in the cave include great menacing cave bears with their very small peculiar ears, a panther, an owl, lots of large and stately bison with gracefully curving horns. In the end chamber, there's one more significant representation, which is important for us to observe. That sketch is on a stalactite, which is inscribed with what looks like female human genitalia at the bottom of the pointed end of the stone. This pubic region, perfectly fitted to the stalactite's shape, merges at the top with the upper part of a bison. Most of us would understand this as an unmistakable allusion to the phenomenon of procreation and fertility. And one could say that the human urge to create art with hybrid beings of parts of animals first appears here. One sees that this combination of a woman's fertile parts with a dangerous or powerful animal struck a chord. It helped these humans to express ideas about survival and fecundity or fertility that were previously inchoate. We see this very same sort of concept in some of Neolithic art and in the art of the ancient Near East. As we'll see in a later lecture, the famous Babylonian Queen of the Night, voluptuously nude with the feet of a raptor, is basically a fully realized descendant of this concept. The Venus of Willendorf and other very early fertility figures fill in the gaps. This preoccupation with fertility and procreation is a theme which runs through the art of the ancient world, beginning right here at Chauvet. We shall see plenty of it, and it often involves animals. We see it in a 7,000-year-old goddess seated between two felines from Çatalhöyük. We see it in the ram, actually goat, in a thicket from Ur. We see it in the goddess Ishtar with her lions, Aphrodite and her doves, and so on. The most urgent concepts and wishes that prehistoric man grappled with find their earliest expressions here. The expression of art here at Chauvet tells us something very profound and interesting about the Paleolithic mind and its capabilities. Clearly, the artists of the Paleolithic were capable of seeing and closely observing the fauna around them. Then they held these very accurate images of the creatures in their minds. They entered the cave and painted the animals and were capable of expressing not only the appearance but the behavior of the animals so accurately just from memory. They did this in charcoal and paint or with engraving, working deep in the recesses of a cave where they didn't have a lot of light and difficult working conditions existed. Obviously, there had to be a good reason for doing this. That reason most likely had to do with religious ritual. We assume with good evidence that Paleolithic man had a shamanistic tradition, meaning that he perceived his world as animate in all things, with a focus on appeasement of spirits and rituals of thanks for his survival and sustenance. He also believed in and sought transformation into an animal or a spirit that could help him communicate with and exhort the spirit world for help, for assistance. Rituals and group experiences helped to secure the curing of illness, to secure sustenance and communication with the dead. Now, altered states were an important part of the religion then. It's believed that humans here and in the Paleolithic in general entered into a trance state, quite possibly before being led into the cave in order to see the spirits which appeared on the walls within. They could achieve these altered states through various means: hunger, pain, rhythmic dancing or drumming, or ingesting alcohol or psychotropic substances. It's probably similar, for example, to the nighttime chanting and dancing ceremonies of candomblé, an African Brazilian religion that we see in Brazil that produces these trance or spirit states. Although we can never know exactly what they were thinking as they beheld these images on the cave walls, surely the numinous presence of an otherworldly set of beings on which the lives of humans depended must have touched them very deeply. Seeing these drawings fulfilled their sense of belonging to something larger and more meaningful than pure survival. It's perhaps these exact same feelings that we see represented or expressed in much of the art of the ancient world from historical times onward. The drawings in the cave themselves held considerable power. They may very well have alluded to complex myths and to stories that we just don't know. The superimposition of images in many caves showed that the very act of drawing had some sort of inherent spiritual meaning. The place in which these images were drawn had importance too. The rock wall's outlines and shapes were incorporated into animal drawing, so sometimes it seemed that the bulging walls or curiously shaped parts of the cave may even have suggested the animal to this lively mind of the artist. All these elements of art prove to be true and operative in the world of ancient art as it follows from the Paleolithic age. We'll deal with many of the same themes in lectures to come, though they may be expressed very, very differently. Sustenance and abundance are extremely important in the art of Mesopotamia and Egypt, and the most important gods, like the Mesopotamian Inanna or Ishtar, are gods of fertility. It is no random thing that fertility gods are associated with animals or even portrayed as animals. We learn from this earliest cave art that humans turn to observing the world around them for religious expression. It's interesting to note that cave artists didn't represent plants, but only animals, and only very rarely humans in this Paleolithic era. Their lives depended upon the hunting and eating of animals, and also upon animals' renewal, which wasn't as easy to achieve as with flora. The importance of these cave images to ancient man is probably difficult to underestimate. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of caves with examples of ancient rock art. In a pre-literate society, it was these images that served as the religious texts. They told the stories of the culture and embodied the hopes and wishes for survival and beyond. Their location in the cave was also important. The experience you would have of entering the cave, perhaps already in an altered state, and seeing these sacred texts upon the wall by torchlight must have been profound. In fact, caves prove particularly important in the origin myths of the Americas, as we'll see later. Essentially, the art here in the cave most likely serves as a visual reminder of the abundance of the animal world and serving human sustenance. It tells the myths and beliefs of a culture which we'll never know. Yet, we can still experience some of the awe and excitement that must have been theirs upon seeing the creations of these expert artists. So, what can we learn from these Aurignacian artists about art and about ourselves? Well, first, that our concern for survival and reproduction, though not as urgent or precarious now, is always there. And it's expressed in the art. Whether it consists of animal images, fecund females, or virile men, it's not far from our minds. Our connection to animals with whom we inhabit the world and which we eat is profound and important. It has been expressed in art even before images of humans were made. Animals not only provided our meat, they threatened us. Predators like lions and venomous animals such as snakes. And we're biologically imprinted with these fears. Humans had to learn to cope with these threats in order to survive. Part of that coping often consisted of deifying these threats or turning their tremendous power to our own advantage. This was done through supplication and appeasement. Surely these cave paintings held an element of wonder and supplication to the powerful rhinos, the lions, the mammoths, and bear, which appear with it. Dominance is expressed in art too. In the cave, it's dominance of animals, predators over prey, larger over smaller. You saw the lion pride stalking the bison. These relationships translate later on in history into signs of status or rank in a chiefdom or state. Rulers align themselves closely with religion and the gods and powerful animals like lions, as we'll see. Finally, we have to reconsider our own ideas about art and its development. What is ancient and used to be referred to as primitive? There is nothing primitive about this cave art. The style and skill we see so very early, 30 to maybe 35,000 years ago, shows us that style in art may have nothing to do with the relative degree of what we call civilization. Urban societies and literate societies, textual ones, have different needs in their art than ones without texts. As we can see, art is all about communication and experience. It allows one person's mind to glimpse into another. It allows one culture or group to see another's concerns. But the manner in which these ideas are expressed visually is always unique to that culture and depends upon factors that often have nothing to do with skill or relative advancement. In the end, this means that in some respect, we have to throw out the common idea that visual culture progresses over time. Art used to be thought to start like this, hesitant strokes, crude abstractions, and not quite accurate renditions of life. It then proceeded to become more and more realistic and like nature over time. This idea is something we used to see repeated in art history texts, where the steady progress from the rude-looking carvings and stiff representations of humanity in Egypt leads inexorably to the discovery of the naturalistic, real, and amazingly human style. If you look at the cave paintings here from Chauvet, there can be no question that realism and skill are already fully in flower. There's no blocky, geometric, or rude depiction of the animals here. So we have to throw out this simplistic idea of progression in art and see art and style for the complex phenomenon that they are. Art serves the needs of each culture or civilization, and we'll see that art is inextricably tied up in the religion and ritual of each age. One of the wonders of looking at ancient art is this: without being able to read the texts, we have this extraordinary window into philosophy and beliefs of any groups which used art for expression. We just have to apply our powers of observation in order to make this leap and immerse ourselves in a cave of dreams like Chauvet.